One moment you're laughing with your best friend, lost in a world of pixelated dreams and forbidden secrets, and the next, your life unravels into a nightmare you can't wake from. I was 16, a lanky sophomore in 2012, navigating the awkward haze of high school with my best friend Alex. We were inseparable, two misfits bonded since we were 5, hiding behind our love for anime and video games. Our world was safe, predictable, until we shattered it with one stupid mistake. It was a Friday in the computer lab, the air thick with the hum of old monitors. Alex leaned over, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Dude, I scored some rare stuff from a Discord guy. You gotta see this." I grinned, expecting more of our usual weeb treasures. He clicked open a folder labeled Premium Content, and my stomach twisted. It wasn't just anime art. It was explicit, the kind of thing that could get us in deep trouble. We were too caught up in our dumb excitement to notice Miss Peterson's shadow looming behind us. Her voice cut through like a blade. "What are you two looking at?" The entire class turned, their stares burning into us. My face flushed hot, the room spinning as shame swallowed me whole. The principal's office was a blur of stern faces and disappointed sighs. My dad picked me up, his silence louder than any lecture. The car ride home felt like a funeral procession. Alex's parents, close with mine, were already on the phone with Dad. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. "I talked to Mr. Walker. You boys have a choice, grounded for a month, no internet, no games. Or you come hunting with me this weekend. Choose wisely, because you're both getting the same punishment." Alex and I texted frantically, weighing our options. A month without our digital escape was unthinkable. Hunting, at least, was something new. Neither of us had ever held a rifle, but how bad could it be? We had no idea what we were walking into. Dad had always been a hunter, his stories of the woods a constant hum in the background of my childhood. I'd always brushed them off, preferring my controllers to his camo gear. But now, with no way out, I felt a strange pull toward the unknown. Alex agreed, his texts full of nervous bravado. Better than being stuck inside, right? I wasn't so sure, but I typed back, "Yeah, let's do it." As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a faint unease settled in my chest like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Something was waiting for us out there, and it wasn't just deer. The drive to Dad's hunting cabin in northern Michigan was a 4-hour descent into nowhere. The world outside the truck's windows blurred from suburbs to endless trees, the road narrowing until it felt like we were being swallowed by the forest. No cell service, no houses, just the crunch of gravel under tires and the weight of Dad's quiet excitement. "This'll make men out of you boys," he said, his grin too wide, his eyes too bright. I exchanged a look with Alex, both of us, bundled in borrowed camo, feeling like imposters in a world we didn't understand. The cabin emerged from the pines like a forgotten relic, small, weathered, smelling of damp wood and stale smoke. Inside, it was a time capsule. Creaky bunks, a scarred table, and a rack of rifles gleaming faintly in the dim light. Dad launched into a safety lecture that felt endless, his voice a steady drumbeat. "Never point a gun unless you mean to shoot. Always know your target. Stay close. Always." I nodded, half listening, my mind drifting to the strange noises outside. Branches snapping, wind hissing through the trees. Alex fidgeted, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous edge. This place felt wrong, like it was watching us. We ate canned, stew by lantern light, the taste metallic and heavy. Dad seemed at ease, almost joyful, recounting old hunting tales I'd heard 100 times. But tonight, his stories felt different, laced with an urgency I couldn't place. The woods, have their own rules, he said, his eyes lingering on the dark windows. Respect them, and they'll respect you. I forced a smile, but my skin prickled. Alex was already snoring on the bunk above me, but sleep wouldn't come. The forest pressed against the cabin, its sounds weaving a restless lullaby. Rustling, leaves, distant cracks, something heavier moving just beyond the trees. I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind my lids was alive, waiting. Waking at 4 a.m. was like clawing my way out of a dream I couldn't remember. Dad was already up, the scent of coffee and oatmeal filling the cabin. "Eat up, boys. You'll need it." His voice was steady, but his hands moved too quickly, checking rifles with a precision that felt almost desperate. We dressed in camo, the fabric stiff and foreign, our orange vests glowing faintly in the pre-dawn gloom. The woods were calling, and I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. We hiked into the forest, flashlights cutting weak beams through the dark. The air was sharp, biting through my boots, my breath clouding in front of me. Dew soaked my socks, each step a reminder of how far we were from home. After what felt like hours, we reached a clearing, the ground soft with pine needles. Dad set up a blind, his movements practiced but tense. "This is the waiting game," he whispered. "Stay quiet. Watch." The sun crept up, painting the woods in shades of gray and gold, but nothing moved. Alex shifted restlessly, earning Dad's sharp glances. Time stretched, heavy with anticipation, until the world itself seemed to hold its breath. By 8 a.m., the forest was still empty. Dad's patience frayed, his voice low. "Let's try another spot." We moved deeper, the trees closing in, their branches knitting a canopy that swallowed the light. The birds had gone silent, their absence louder than any sound. I noticed, at first, a subtle shift in the air, like the world was pulling away from us. Dad stopped abruptly, his finger to his lips pointing ahead. My heart stuttered as I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing but trees. Then, movement. Small, erratic, wrong. Not a deer, not an animal. Something else. We crouched behind fallen logs, my pulse hammering in my ears. Dad handed me his binoculars, his face a mask of confusion and something darker. Fear. "Tell me what you see," he said, his voice barely a breath. I peered through the lenses, my hands trembling. The forest came into focus, and there they were. 3 figures no taller than 3 feet, moving between the trees. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their movements jerky, like puppets on fraying strings. They had no clothes, no clear faces, just vague, hollow shapes where eyes should be. They bent low, gathering something. Mushrooms, maybe, their hands quick and precise. They weren't human. They weren't anything I'd ever known. Alex nudged me, his voice a shaky whisper. "Let me see." I passed him the binoculars, my eyes locked on Dad. His face hadn't changed, but his hands gripped his rifle too tightly, knuckles white. "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He shook his head, his gaze distant. "I don't know. 20 years in these woods, and I've never..." He trailed off, handing the binoculars back to Alex, who gasped, his breath catching. "What the hell are those?" he hissed, over and over like a prayer gone wrong. Dad's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. "We need to go, quietly, don't let them hear us." We started backing away, each step deliberate, the forest floor betraying us with every snap of a twig. Then Alex tripped, his body crashing against a root, his rifle clattering to the ground. The sound was a gunshot in the silence, echoing through the trees. We froze, our eyes darting to the figures. They had stopped, their heads turned toward us, their featureless faces somehow seeing. Even from 50 yards, I felt their gaze, cold and heavy, pinning me in place. "Run," Dad whispered, the word a command that shattered my paralysis. We bolted, branches tearing at my clothes, the forest a blur of green and shadow. My lungs burned, my legs moving on instinct alone. Behind me, I heard Alex stumble again, his cry sharp and desperate. I turned, seeing Dad stop to pull him up. "Keep going," Dad shouted, his voice raw. "Back to the cabin." I hesitated, torn, but his scream, "Go!" sent me running again, heart pounding, fear drowning out everything else. The woods were alive now, whispering, watching, chasing. I don't know how I found the cabin, but I burst through the door, slamming it shut and locking it with shaking hands. I grabbed Dad's shotgun from the rack, fumbling with the shells he'd shown me how to load. My fingers slipped, shells scattering across the floor like bones. I sat facing the door, the shotgun heavy in my lap, every creak of the cabin a threat. Minutes bled into hours, the sun sinking, the shadows stretching like fingers across the walls. Panic clawed at me, my mind replaying those pale figures, their hollow faces, the way they looked at us. Footsteps crunched outside, slow and deliberate. My grip on the shotgun tightened, my breath shallow. The door handle rattled, locked tight. Then a knock, steady, insistent. "Son, it's us. Open up." It was Dad's voice, but it was wrong. Flat, hollow, like an echo of the man I knew. "Dad?" I called, my voice trembling. "Open the door, Alex is hurt." I crept to the window, peering through the grimy glass. There they were, Dad and Alex, standing in the fading light. They looked normal, almost. But Dad's posture was too stiff, his shoulders unnaturally square. Alex stared at the ground, avoiding my eyes. Something was wearing their faces, and it wasn't them. "What happened out there?" I asked through the door, my voice cracking. "We'll explain inside. Open the door." Dad's tone was colder now, stripped of warmth. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. "Alex, you okay?" He nodded, but his silence screamed louder than words. Against every instinct, I unlocked the door, the click echoing in my skull. They stepped inside, Dad moving too smoothly, like a machine. He took the shotgun from me, his fingers brushing mine, cold as stone. "Don't need this now," he said, his voice a monotone. Alex sank onto the couch, staring at nothing, his face pale as the creatures we'd seen. I was trapped in a room with strangers, and I didn't know how to escape. I pressed them for answers, my voice shaking. "What were those things?" Dad paused, his back to me as he packed our gear. When he turned, his eyes were wrong, flat, lifeless, like glass marbles. "What things?" he asked, his tone daring me to argue. "The small creatures we saw." He shook his head, a faint smile curling his lips. "We saw a bear. We ran. That's all." I looked at Alex, desperate, for an ally. He met my gaze for a split second, shaking his head slightly. A silent plea. "Don't push it." We packed in silence, the air thick with unspoken dread, and drove home. 4 hours of quiet that felt like a lifetime. Dropping Alex off was like losing a limb. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said, but he only nodded, slipping into his house without a word. At home, Mom asked about the trip, her voice bright with expectation. "Fine," Dad said, brushing past her to the basement where he stayed all night. The next day, Alex didn't call. Neither did I. At school, he was a ghost of himself, his eyes avoiding mine. "What happened after I ran?" I asked, cornering him in the hallway. "Nothing," he said, his voice trembling. "Like your dad said, a bear." But his hands shook, and a month later he transferred schools, severing our friendship like a blade. He was running from something, and so was I. Home became a prison. Dad locked himself in the basement, a new bolt on the door keeping us out. I'd hear him muttering, his voice low and rhythmic like a chant. Mom noticed too, her smile strained. "Your father's just going through something," she said, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Dad started taking night walks, returning with mud-caked boots and scratches on his arms, his explanations vague or non-existent. He lost his job, his presence in the house shrinking to a shadow. When he spoke, his voice was flat, his movements stiff, his eyes those same lifeless marbles. He wasn't my dad anymore, and I didn't know what he was. 3 months after the trip, I woke to Mom's screams. I ran to their room, finding her crumpled on the floor, Dad standing over her, his face blank. I called 911, my voice breaking. Paramedics said it was a stroke, severe. Dad didn't come to the hospital. Mom lingered in a coma for 2 weeks, then slipped away, her hand cold in mine. At her funeral, Dad stood apart, his face untouched by grief. "It's natural," he said when I tried to talk, his voice a hollow echo. "Part of the cycle." I was alone now, living with a stranger in a house that smelled of earth and decay. The next year and a half was a slow suffocation. Dad barely acknowledged me, his days spent in the locked basement. Strange smells wafted up, earthy, organic, like rotting roots. I heard scratching at night, too regular to be mice. Packages arrived, small and unmarked, vanishing into the basement with him. I found tiny footprints in the mud by the back door, too small for a human, with too many toes. Dad grew thinner, his skin pale, almost translucent like the creatures we'd seen. The house wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them. I counted the days to my 18th birthday, my escape planned in secret. When I got accepted to a college in California, I packed while Dad was on one of his walks, my hands shaking as I stuffed clothes into a bag. The next morning I knocked on the basement door to say goodbye, but silence answered. I left a note, drove west, and tried to rebuild. College was a fresh start, new friends, new life. But the nightmares followed, pale figures in the trees, Dad's wrong eyes, the forest's endless whisper. I thought I'd escaped, but some things don't let go. My first winter break, I drove back to retrieve the rest of my things, dreading the return. The house was a ruin, grass overgrown, mail spilling from the box. Neighbors said Dad had vanished months ago. Inside, the air was thick with mold and that same earthy smell, now everywhere. I gathered my belongings, my heart pounding as I approached the basement. A key hung on a nail beside the door, glinting like an invitation. I didn't want to go down there, but I had to know. The lock clicked open, the door heavy as I pushed it. The basement was empty, bare concrete, no tools, no workbench, just a single piece of paper in the center of the floor. I picked it up, my hands trembling. 3 words in Dad's handwriting, the little ones. My breath caught, panic surging. I ran upstairs, my eyes catching something in the kitchen, small footprints in the dust leading to the back door. Multiple sets, some tiny, some larger, all with too many toes. They'd been here, and they'd taken him. I called the police, but they dismissed it. A missing man, nothing more. The footprints were just dirt, they said. I sold the house, left my hometown, and built a life far away. But the nightmares never stopped. Those pale figures, moving between the trees. Dad's eyes staring through me. The little ones waiting. They're still out there, and I know they remember me. The treehouse stood like a promise, its wooden walls glowing gold in the summer dusk. whispering of adventures only a kid could dream. But some promises are traps, and some whispers hide teeth. I was 9 years old in the summer of 1998, living in Peterborough, Ontario, where the world felt endless and safe. Our house, tucked in a quiet suburb, had a backyard that was practically a forest. Half an acre of towering oaks, a trickling creek, and best of all, a treehouse perched between two ancient trees. It was my castle, my spaceship, my fortress, built by the previous owners and fortified by my dad with sturdy walls and a slanted roof. From its platform, 12 feet above the ground, I could see the entire yard, the creek glinting like a silver thread, and the shadowy conservation area beyond our fence. The air up there carried the sharp tang of sap and the faint dampness of the creek, a scent that felt like freedom. That treehouse was everything to me, until it became a place I'd never climb again. My best friend, Eric Lindstrom, lived 3 streets over. We'd been thick as thieves since kindergarten, bonded over our love for dinosaurs, space, and the kind of adventures only kids can dream up. That summer, Eric's world was crumbling. His parents were locked in a bitter divorce, his mom working long hours, his dad exiled to a downtown apartment. So he spent most days at my house, the two of us retreating to the treehouse like it was our last refuge. We'd haul up comic books, bags of chips, and Eric's beat-up CD player, blasting music until the batteries died. Some days we were astronauts orbiting a distant planet. Others, we were explorers hacking through the Amazon. The treehouse was our sanctuary, its rough plywood walls shielding us from the chaos of Eric's home and the weight of growing up. But something else was watching, and it was closer than we thought. It started in early August, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Eric and I were sprawled on the treehouse floor, flipping through tattered Goosebumps books, the air heavy with the scent of pine and warm plywood. The evening was alive with the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of neighborhood life, but a strange sound cut through it all. A heavy splashing from the creek, not the gentle trickle we knew. We'd seen raccoons and deer down there before, but this was different, deliberate, like something big was wading through the shallows, its movements slow and purposeful. My skin prickled, a warning I couldn't name. We crawled to the window, a rough square cut in the wall, and squinted into the fading light. The sun glared back, blinding us, but the splashing grew louder, joined by a low rhythmic sound, like labored breathing mixed with a faint chattering, sharp and unnatural. "Want to check it out?" Eric whispered, his voice half excited, half nervous. I shook my head, my gut twisting, a cold knot forming in my chest. "Let's wait, it'll move on." He rolled his eyes, calling me a scaredy cat, but he didn't climb down either. We sat there, books forgotten, listening as the sounds circled below. The breathing was heavy, almost human, but wrong, too deep, too steady, like a machine struggling to mimic life. The chattering came in bursts like teeth clicking together in slow motion, each sound scraping against my nerves. After 10 agonizing minutes, the noises faded, swallowed by the evening's hum. When Mom called us for dinner, her voice warm and oblivious, we scrambled down the ladder, our feet barely touching the rungs, and ran to the house without looking back. I didn't tell my parents. What could I say? That the creek was breathing? Few days later, Eric was sleeping over. We'd begged our parents to let us camp in the treehouse, a dream we'd been chasing all summer. Dad gave in, stringing up a camping lantern and making us promise to come inside if we got spooked. We dragged up sleeping bags, pillows, and enough candy to make us sick, giggling like we'd won the lottery. The treehouse felt alive that night, its walls creaking softly under the weight of our excitement, the lantern casting golden shadows that danced across the plywood. By 11 p.m., we were deep in scary stories, each trying to outdo the other with tales of ghosts and monsters, our voices low to keep the night at bay. Then from the neighbor's yard, Buster, their ancient beagle who barely moved anymore, started barking, a frantic, desperate sound that cut through the stillness like a blade. My heart lurched. Buster never barked like that. The barking stopped abruptly, mid-yowl, like someone had flipped a switch. Eric and I froze, our stories dying on our lips, the silence heavier than the noise had been. "Think something's wrong with Buster?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eric shrugged, but his wide eyes betrayed him, reflecting the lantern's dim glow. We doused the light and crept to the window, peering toward the Cohen's yard. Their motion sensor light flicked on, bathing their patio in harsh white, but Buster was nowhere in sight. The light went out, then on again, off, on, off, like something was pacing just out of view, its movements quick and deliberate. "Maybe it's a cat," Eric said, his voice shaky, barely convincing himself. I nodded, wanting to believe him, but cats didn't trigger those lights. You needed something bigger, heavier, something that didn't belong. We held our breath, the silence, pressing against us like a living thing. Then it came again, the breathing from the creek, but closer now, right below the treehouse. It was deep, labored, like a beast fighting for air, each inhale rattling with a wet, guttural edge. Something moved through the grass, a slow, dragging sound. Not footsteps, but something heavier, slithering almost, as if it was too large to lift itself fully. Every few seconds that chattering returned, slow and deliberate, like a warning carved in sound. My hand clamped onto Eric's arm, and for once he didn't pull away. We sat paralyzed, afraid to even blink, as the sound circled the oak trees below. The air grew thick, the scent of damp earth and something fouler, rotting leaves maybe, seeping through the window. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes before the noises stopped, leaving only the pounding of our hearts. Eric suggested we run for the house, his voice trembling with forced bravery. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the dark beyond the window. What if it's still there? He didn't argue. We spent the night huddled in our sleeping bags, taking turns watching the window, every rustle of leaves a fresh terror. The treehouse, once our fortress, felt like a trap, its walls too thin, its height no longer a shield. When dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks, we bolted down the ladder and into the house, collapsing on the couch. Mom found us there, still wrapped in our sleeping bags, and bought our flimsy excuse about mosquitoes. I wanted to check the yard for tracks, but fear glued my feet to the floor. Later, alone, I forced myself to look. The grass around the treehouse was flattened in a rough circle, like something heavy had paced around it all night. But there were no footprints, no claw marks, nothing to prove what we'd heard. It was real, and it left no trace. The next week was a blur of unease. Our trash cans were knocked over twice, the contents scattered across the driveway but untouched, not rummaged through like raccoons would do. A thick, musty smell, like wet fur and rotting leaves, started appearing in the evenings, lingering for minutes before vanishing, as if the air itself was tainted. Mom thought a skunk was nesting under the deck, but Dad found nothing when he checked, his flashlight revealing only cobwebs and dry earth. Eric and I avoided the treehouse for days, sticking to the safety of the house, our laughter replaced by uneasy glances. But eventually our pride got the better of us. "We're not babies," Eric said, his voice more hopeful than certain. "It was probably just a bear." I nodded, clinging to the lie, and we agreed to go back, but only in broad daylight, never after sunset. The treehouse felt different now, like it was waiting for us to make a mistake. The second major incident came during another sleepover, this time in my bedroom. It was past midnight, the glow of my Nintendo 64 casting flickering shadows on the walls, the hum of the console a faint comfort. We were deep in a game, our thumbs sore from button mashing, when a soft tap hit my window. We froze, controllers forgotten, the room suddenly too small. Another tap, then another, light but deliberate, like someone testing the glass. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard, the window too high for branches or stray pebbles. My stomach churned as we crept to the sill, staying low, the moonlight cold against our faces. The moon was nearly full, bathing the yard in silver light, turning the oaks into skeletal giants. At first, nothing seemed wrong, just the familiar shapes of the trees and the creek glinting in the distance. Then Eric grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging in, and pointed, his breath hitching. Near the treehouse, something moved. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 7 feet, and thin. Too thin, its limbs stretched like shadows pulled taut, bending in ways that defied bone and muscle. It moved in jerks, like a marionette with half its strings cut, each step unnatural, as if it was learning to walk upright. My breath caught, the world tilting, my mind screaming that this wasn't real. As we watched, it approached the oak tree and began to climb, not using the ladder but scaling the trunk itself, its long arms hooking into the bark with spider-like precision, its body folding and unfolding in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. Within seconds, it vanished into the treehouse, swallowed by the dark square of the window, leaving only silence. We backed away, our backs pressed against the wall, terror choking us. "What do we do?" Eric whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes wide with panic. "Get my parents," I said. But neither of us moved. We were just kids, and some part of us knew adults wouldn't believe us. They'd say we were imagining things, spooked by our own stories, sent back to bed with a pat on the head. So we stayed, staring at the window, waiting for the nightmare to spill into our world. The air in the room grew heavy, the scent of dust and old carpet mixing with something sharper, like ozone before a storm. An hour later, we saw it again, standing by the creek. Its proportions were wrong, arms dangling past where knees should, head tilted at an impossible angle, its silhouette a black wound against the moonlight. It stood motionless, facing our house, its gaze a weight I could feel through the glass. Then it turned and glided into the conservation area, vanishing. Among the trees, its movements too smooth, too silent. It knew we were watching, and it wanted us to know. We didn't sleep that night, our eyes glued to the window, expecting it to return, its long arms reaching through the glass. In the morning, we tried to convince ourselves it was a trick of the light, a shadow warped by the moon in our tired minds. But when we checked the treehouse later that day, the truth was undeniable. Our comic books, usually scattered across the floor, were stacked in a perfect pyramid in the center, each edge aligned with unnatural precision, as if measured by a ruler. The lantern, always hung on a nail, was outside, placed carefully against the tree trunk, its glass cold to the touch, condensation beading on its surface like sweat. Something had been inside, and it had left a message, a claim on our sanctuary. That was the last time we climbed the treehouse that summer. Eric started, spending more time with his dad, his visits to my house growing rare, our conversations strained. By September, when school began, our friendship had frayed, the weight of what we'd seen too heavy to carry together. We never spoke of it, as if saying it aloud would summon that thing back. My parents noticed I'd stopped playing in the way treehouse and assumed I'd outgrown it, their smiles tinged with nostalgia, unaware of the fear that kept me grounded. The strange incidents continued through the fall. Outdoor furniture rearranged overnight, Mom's garden gnomes vanishing and reappearing in odd corners, their painted faces somehow more sinister. That heavy breathing drifted through quiet nights, faint but persistent, burrowing into my dreams like a parasite. I was the only one who seemed to hear it. The sound a secret between me and the dark. The treehouse wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to something else. That winter, a brutal ice storm split one of the oaks, its branches crashing through the treehouse, collapsing half the structure in a tangle of splintered wood. Dad had the remains torn down, citing safety, and I felt a secret relief, like a weight lifting from my chest, though the fear lingered like a scar. The strange smells and sounds faded, the yard returning to its quiet normalcy. The creek once, again just water. Life moved on, but the fear never left me. Years later in high school, I stumbled across a natural science project about the conservation area behind our house. It had once been part of a vast forest, sacred to the indigenous, people who spoke of tall, thin beings that haunted the deep woods. They walked upright but weren't human, climbing trees with unnatural grace and speaking in clicks that echoed through the night like a warning. The stories called them guardians of the forest, protectors of its secrets. But to me, they were invaders, stealing the safety of my childhood and leaving only shadows in their wake. I wondered if they still roamed the conservation area, their long arms reaching for those who strayed too close. I never learned what Eric and I saw that summer. Part of me wants to believe it was just our imaginations. Two kids scared silly by shadows and stories, our minds weaving monsters from moonlight. But I can't forget the way that thing moved, its long arms pulling it up the tree with a grace that wasn't human. I can't forget the pyramid of comics, each page perfectly aligned, the lantern placed just so, the breathing that followed me into my dreams. I can't forget the way Eric's eyes changed, the spark of our friendship dimming as we ran from the truth. Something was in that treehouse, and I think it's still out there, waiting for me to climb back up. The house smelled of warm cookies and old books, a haven where a kid should feel safe. But in its shadows, something watched, its eyes colder than winter, its presence a promise of dread. I was 5 when I first stayed at my grandparents' house in Ridgewood, a creaky 2-story colonial with dark wood paneling, and too many rooms for just 2 people. The air was thick with the scent of potpourri, its floral sweetness mingling with the faint mustiness of old furniture and the buttery warmth of Grandma's baking. The house felt like a hug at first. Polished banisters, soft rugs, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. But beneath its charm lay a stillness, a quiet that seemed to listen. Those weekends were a child's dream. No bedtime, endless treats, and the freedom to explore every nook. But one thing tainted it all. Jasper, my grandfather's German shepherd, a massive creature whose gaze pierced me like a blade. From the moment I saw him, I knew he wasn't just a dog. He was something else, and he saw through me. My parents dropped me off every other weekend, their car's hum fading before Grandma pressed warm cookies into my hands, her smile crinkling her eyes. Grandpa Arthur, tall and weathered like the oaks in their yard, would ruffle my hair and launch into stories about Jasper's glory days. The den was a shrine to the dog, walls covered with faded ribbons and black and white photos from obedience. Competitions, Jasper's regal form frozen beside Grandpa's proud grin. To them, Jasper was a legend, loyal, disciplined, a living testament to Grandpa's skill. To me, he was a shadow that loomed larger than the house itself. During meals, he'd lie under the table, his head on his paws, but his eyes never left. Zuni's tracking each bite, each fidget. No one else felt it, and that isolation made my fear grow sharper. The first hint of something wrong came on a quiet afternoon when I was 5. I was at the kitchen table, coloring a dinosaur, the waxy scent of crayons mixing with Grandma's humming and the faint clink of her mixing bowl. Jasper was under the table, his breathing slow, deceptively calm. A crayon rolled off the edge, and as I reached down, his eyes snapped open, locking onto mine. They weren't a dog's eyes, not warm, not curious, but cold, calculating like he was peeling back my skin to see my secrets. His lips curled, not in a snarl, but in a twisted, almost human expression, a mockery of a smile that sent ice through my veins. My heart pounded, my hand jerking back so fast I knocked over my chair. I stammered to Grandma, pointing at Jasper, but she laughed, her voice a warm blanket that didn't reach me. "Sweetie, Jasper loves kids, he's just playful." Her dismissal stung, planting the seed that no one would ever believe me. That moment defined my visits. When adults were around, Jasper was perfect, sitting obediently, tail wagging, just enough to charm, his demeanor a mask. The second their backs turned, he shifted. He'd stare from across the room, head tilted at an unnatural angle, or trail me through the house, his steps silent but heavy, like a predator pacing its cage. Grandpa's praise was relentless, his voice thick with awe. "Smartest dog I've ever known. Sometimes I swear he understands every word." Grandma was no better, cooing at Jasper in a high-pitched baby voice that grated my nerves, slipping him scraps of meat from her plate. "Does Jasper want a treat?" she'd ask, answering herself with a giggle. Their love for him blinded them, and I learned to keep my fear silent, a secret I carried alone. By 7, my unease had hardened into dread. One spring day, I was in the backyard, the air sweet with blooming lilacs, the grass cool under my sneakers. I'd set down my favorite action figure, a robot with glowing eyes to tie my shoe, the breeze carrying the distant hum of a lawnmower. When I looked up, Jasper was there, standing over the toy, his gaze locked on me, unblinking. Without breaking eye contact, he lowered his head, seized the figure in his jaws, and crushed it, the plastic snapping like dry twigs. The sound echoed in my chest, each crack a deliberate act. He dropped the mangled pieces at my feet, his tail swaying slowly, almost taunting, before turning and stalking away, his shadow long and dark. I ran to Grandma, tears burning my eyes, but her scolding cut deeper than the loss. "You shouldn't. Leave toys where Jasper can get them," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Grandpa handed me $5 for a new one, his eyes flicking to Jasper, who sat nearby watching me with that same icy stare. No one saw the malice, and I hated them for it. The worst came at 9. I was sleeping in the guest room, a cozy space, with floral wallpaper and a quilt that smelled of lavender, its softness a lie against the house's growing menace. I woke around midnight, my bladder urgent, the house wrapped in a silence that felt alive. The hallway was a tunnel of darkness, the light switch too far to risk waking anyone. As I stepped out, a sound stopped me, the soft pad of paws on hardwood, slow and deliberate, like a hunter measuring its steps. Jasper emerged from the shadows at the hall's far end, a silhouette against the faint moonlight spilling from a window. His eyes glinted like polished coins, his posture too still, too intentional, as if he'd been waiting. My heart raced, my feet rooted, the air thick with a scent I couldn't place. Damp fur, maybe, or something older, earthier. I took a step back and he mirrored me, advancing one step, his gaze never wavering. Another step back, another forward, a twisted dance that pinned me in place. Panic surged and I turned to run, my socks slipping on the polished floor. His paws pounded behind me, faster than I thought possible, the sound a drumbeat in my skull. I reached my room, slamming the door just as his body crashed against it, the wood groaning under his weight. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, pressing against my chest. Then it began. A slow, methodical scraping at the door, not frantic, but deliberate, each drag of his claws carving intent into the wood. I stood trembling, my back against the wall, certain he'd break through, his cold eyes finding me in the dark. The scraping stretched for nearly an hour, each sound a pulse, in the night, until it stopped, leaving a void that was worse. I didn't move until dawn's light crept under the door, my body stiff with fear. In the morning, deep gouges marred the door's base, jagged lines that didn't look like scratches but something more purposeful, almost like runes etched by a mind that wasn't canine. Grandpa examined them, his face clouding with confusion, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "This isn't like Jasper," he muttered, his voice low. But he glanced at the dog who lay nearby, calm as ever, his gaze sliding to me. For the first time, someone else saw a crack in Jasper's mask, and it terrified me more than the night. Before, Grandma hovered nearby, her hands twisting her apron, her usual cheer replaced by a nervous edge. The house felt different that day, its warmth a facade, its shadows deeper, as if Jasper's presence had stained it. Jasper died when I was 11, and I thought that would end it. I was wrong. That weekend he'd been acting stranger than usual, pacing the house with a restless energy, his eyes darting to corners where nothing stood, his fur bristling as if he sensed something I couldn't. He'd growl at empty air, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor, setting my teeth on edge. By night, his barking grew relentless, not angry but desperate, a sound that clawed at the house's quiet. Grandpa locked him in the basement, the door's bolt sliding shut with a finality that should have comforted me but didn't. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a silence so complete it felt wrong. The house holding its breath, the usual creaks and groans absent. I lay there, my pulse loud in my ears, realizing I couldn't hear Jasper. No pacing, no growls, nothing. In the morning, Grandpa found him at the bottom of the basement stairs, his body still, his lips pulled back in a snarl, eyes wide and staring at nothing. The vet called it a heart attack, common for his age, but I saw his face before Grandma ushered me away. He didn't look peaceful. He looked furious, like death was a battle he refused to lose. 3 months later, I returned and found something, worse than Jasper alive. In the den near Grandpa's favorite chair stood Jasper, stuffed and mounted, his fur groomed to a glossy sheen, his posture rigid and proud, a grotesque echo of the photos on the wall. The taxidermist had botched his eyes, crafting glass orbs that glinted with an unnatural life, following me as I moved, their gaze a weight I couldn't shake. Grandpa beamed, his voice thick with a grief that felt like obsession. "Doesn't he look magnificent?" he asked, his hands resting on the stuffed form as if it could feel his touch. Grandma was quieter, her smile strained, her eyes avoiding Jasper's. "Your grandpa couldn't let him go," she whispered later, her voice heavy with something like regret. I stared at those eyes, and they stared back, promising a truth I wasn't ready to face. That night, the house turned against me. I was reading in bed, the lamp casting soft shadows across the floral wallpaper, when a sound froze me. The faint pat of paws on hardwood in the hallway, slow and deliberate, each step a heartbeat in the dark. My blood ran cold, my book slipping. From my hands, its pages fluttering like trapped birds. It couldn't be Jasper, he was dead. A hollow shell downstairs, his soul long gone, or so I told myself. But the sound came again, Pausing outside my door, the air growing thick with the scent of dust and something earthier, like wet fur mingled with decay. The knob rattled, the door creaking open a few inches, revealing a sliver of darkness that pulsed with intent. I sat paralyzed, staring at the gap, certain a muzzle would appear, those glass eyes glinting in the lamplight. Nothing came, but the weight of being watched pressed against me, a presence as real as the bed beneath me. I forced myself to check. The hall, my flashlight trembling, its beam slicing through the gloom. The hallway was empty, but downstairs in the den's dim light, Jasper's taxidermy form stood unmoved, its eyes catching the beam and throwing it back like a challenge. I wedged a chair under my door and barely slept, the night alive with phantom sounds. Soft steps, a faint scraping, the house breathing with me. The next morning, I found faint paw prints in the dust outside my room, too small for a living dog, too precise for chance. Their edges sharp as if pressed by something deliberate. Grandma frowned when I showed her, her hands tightening on her coffee mug, muttering about a neighbor's cat. We both knew no cat had been here, and her eyes betrayed her fear. Over the next 2 years, my visits became a gauntlet of terror. My belongings would shift, my backpack unzipped, homework scattered across the floor like leaves in a storm. My sneaker found in the garden, chewed and caked with dirt, as if dragged through a grave. Jasper's taxidermy never moved, but sometimes I'd enter the den and find him facing a different direction, his glass eyes locked on me, though Grandpa swore nothing had changed. At night, my blankets would slip off, a weight pressing at the foot of my bed like something settling there, its presence heavy but invisible. I'd wake to the faint pad of paws, always stopping outside my door. The silence that followed worse than any sound. The house was his domain now, and I was the intruder, marked by his gaze. The final incident came at 14, during spring break. Grandpa and Grandma had gone to bed early, their footsteps fading upstairs, leaving me on the couch. The TV's flicker a thin shield against the dark. The house was quiet, its warmth a lie, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. I dozed off, lulled by the drone of a late-night show, only to wake around midnight, my skin prickling with the certainty of being watched. Sat up, my heart pounding, and realized Jasper's taxidermy was gone from its spot in the den. Panic clawed at me, my eyes scanning the shadows, the room too large, too dark. I told myself Grandpa had moved him for cleaning, but the lie crumbled under the weight of my fear. I decided to flee to my room, each step on the creaky stairs louder than the last, the house's silence a trap waiting to spring. At the top of the stairs I heard it, the pad of paws on hardwood coming from my room, each step a deliberate claim. My bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling out, cold and sharp. I pushed it open, my hand shaking, and there he was, Jasper, not the stiff taxidermy but something alive or pretending to be. His fur was dull, matted, his movements jerky, like a broken film reel stuttering to life, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating, boring into me with a hunger I couldn't name. He opened his mouth, lips curling into a smile, teeth gleaming unnaturally white in the dark, a mockery of life. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, rooted by a terror that felt ancient, as if the house itself had summoned him. He stepped forward, each paw deliberate, the floor groaning under a weight too heavy for his form. Then, faster than I could react, he lunged, his teeth sinking into my hair, the pain sharp and real like needles piercing my scalp. He dragged me into the hallway, my hands clawing at the doorframe, my screams tearing through the silence, raw and desperate. My cries woke. Grandpa and Grandma, their footsteps thundering down the hall, their voices sharp with alarm. Grandpa froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he saw Jasper, solid, snarling, pulling me across the floor, my scalp burning with each tug. The hallway light flicked on, and Jasper vanished, not fleeing, but dissolving, like smoke, scattered by a sudden gust, leaving only the sting in my scalp and faint marks on the floor. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, but his presence lingered, a stain in the air. I collapsed, sobbing, as Grandma helped me up, her hands trembling, her face pale with a fear she couldn't voice. Grandpa stared at the empty space, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw it," he said, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking as if he'd touched something forbidden. That night, I slept in their room, the door locked, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, afraid to close them, the house's silence a threat I couldn't trust. In the morning, Jasper's taxidermy was gone. Grandpa refused to say what he'd done, his face set like stone, only muttering that it was taken care of. Later, he admitted he'd felt it too. Objects moving in the night, faint steps echoing through the house. A constant sense of being watched, like eyes boring into him from the shadows. He'd dismissed it as grief, unable to let Jasper go, believing his love had kept the dog close. But it wasn't love that stayed, and we both knew it was something darker, something that had never been Jasper at all. I never stayed at their house again, my parents accepting my refusal without question. Their concern, a quiet acknowledgement of my fear. Grandpa cleared out Jasper's things, ribbons, photos, every trace erased as if he could undo what he'd invited. The house felt emptier after that, but never safe, its warmth a mask over something that lingered in the walls. Years later, after Grandpa and Grandma passed, I helped clean out the house, each room a ghost of those weekends, the air heavy with dust and memory. In the garden, under an unmarked stone, I found a metal box buried deep, its surface rusted but intact. Inside was Jasper's collar, its tag faded, the name barely legible, and a note in Grandpa's handwriting, the ink blurred but clear enough. Some doors, once opened, are hard to close. My hands shook as I held it, the collar cold against my skin, its weight heavier than it should have been. I reburied it, untouched, and told no one, afraid that speaking its name would wake it. Some secrets are safer in the ground, locked away where they can't claw their way back. I still wake to the phantom sound of paws on hardwood, a rhythm that haunts my nights, each step a reminder of those eyes, alive or glass, watching me. Through the years, Jasper's gaze follows me in dreams, cold and unyielding, a promise that he's not gone, not truly. He's still out there waiting, and I pray his remains stay buried, because if they don't, I know I'll never be safe. The night pulsed with mischief, the kind that draws you to forbidden places, promising thrills but hiding terrors in the dark. It was Devil's Night, 2011, and I was cruising through our small town with my boyfriend A and his friend B, the car's headlights slicing through the crisp autumn air. We were restless, teenagers chasing the rush of doing something reckless, our laughter tinged with nervous energy. The streets hummed with the chaos of kids pulling pranks, their silhouettes darting through shadows, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves, distant bonfires, and the faint tang of spray paint. We had no plan, just a hunger for adventure, and when B leaned forward from the back seat, his eyes glinting in the dashboard's dim glow, and said, "Let's hit the old tuberculosis hospital." My heart skipped a beat. I'd never been there, but its name carried a weight, a whisper from a past that felt alive, pulling us toward it like a tide. The hospital was in the next town, A short drive that stretched under the weight of our anticipation, the road flanked by bare fields and skeletal trees. It wasn't just a building, it was a relic, a Gothic monstrosity looming over the landscape, its spires clawing at the starless sky like fingers reaching from a grave. Once a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients, it had later become a state mental hospital, a place where pain and despair had seeped into the very bricks. We parked down the street at a dive bar, its neon sign buzzing faintly, casting a sickly glow over the lot. We crept toward the hospital on foot, our sneakers crunching on gravel, the air growing heavier with each step, thick with a damp, earthy smell, like soil freshly turned. The building rose before us, its windows black and hollow, watching us, like eyes that never blinked, their emptiness a warning we ignored. We circled to the back, our flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness, the cold biting through our jackets. We found a loose wooden panel covering a ground floor window, its edges splintered and soft with rot, the wood yielding under his touch like decaying flesh. I went first, squeezing through the gap, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows inside, his voice muffled as he called us to follow. I went next, my pulse hammering, the air inside cold and stale, carrying the sharp tang of mildew, old medicine, and something fainter, like the memory of sickness. B came last, but as he climbed through, he twisted his knee, his face contorting, in pain as he hit the floor, his breath sharp and ragged. My stomach dropped, a voice in my head screaming to turn back. But we were too deep in the thrill to listen. I crouched beside him, asking if he could walk, his flashlight beam jittering across B's pale face, while I scanned the room, my light revealing a cavernous space that might have been a waiting area. Stacked chairs lined the walls, their metal, frames rusted and twisted, and a lone wheelchair sat in the center, its wheels caked with dust, its seat sagging as if still bearing an unseen weight. B insisted he was fine, his voice tight but stubborn, refusing to let his injury ruin the night. We moved deeper into the hospital, A leading with his flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom, catching on peeling paint and cracked tiles that crunched under our feet. I stayed close, the cold seeping into my bones, my breath visible. The dim light, each exhale a reminder of how far we were from safety. B limped behind, his steps uneven, the sound swallowed by the building's oppressive silence, a quiet that felt alive, pressing against us like a hand. We reached a long hallway, its doors gaping open like mouths, revealing rooms cluttered with debris, broken furniture, shattered glass, and piles of charred patient files, their edges curling like burned skin, as if someone had tried to erase the hospital's secrets but left them smoldering instead. The air grew heavier, the scent of ash and decay clinging to my throat, a bitter taste that made me gag, a reminder that some truths can't be burned away. A and B filled the silence with hushed stories, their voices low to keep the darkness at bay, their words trembling with a mix of awe and fear. They told me the hospital's history, how it had housed tuberculosis patients gasping for air, then became a mental hospital where the desperate were subjected to brutal treatments, their screams echoing through these halls, their pain etched into the walls. I stepped into a room, my flashlight catching on a stack of unburned files, their pages yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but legible. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them, finding records of patients labeled incurable, their lives reduced to scrawled notes, ice baths to break fevers, electroshock to quiet minds, lobotomies to erase them. Each word was a wound, the paper heavy with the weight of forgotten lives, their suffering a pulse beneath my touch. I wanted to stop, to drop the files and run, but something held me there. A morbid curiosity that felt like a command. urging me to bear witness. We pressed on down the hallway, my flashlight sweeping into rooms frozen in time, their contents a gallery of horrors. One held rusted tubs, their edges stained with years of use, the air thick with the ghost of cold water and restrained limbs. Another had a machine with wires and dials, its metal tarnished but intact, its purpose unmistakable, an electroshock device, its presence a silent accusation of the cruelty it had inflicted. The hallway ended in a T-shape, splitting left to a cafeteria with overturned tables and scattered trays, and right to a bank of elevators and stairs, their doors rusted open, the shafts plunging into darkness. A chalkboard hung on the wall, its surface cracked but intact, dusted with faint traces of old lessons or schedules. I don't know what possessed me, maybe a need to leave a mark, maybe a defiance against the building's weight. But I picked up a piece of chalk, its texture, gritty against my fingers, and wrote my name, the letters stark and trembling against the dark. The moment the chalk scraped the board, the air shifted, like I'd signed a contract with something unseen, sealing our fate. I turned to check on A and B, who were near the elevators, their flashlights probing the open shafts, the rusted cars, barely visible at the bottom, their cables tangled like veins. As I stepped closer, I noticed the exit sign above us flicker to life, its red glow unnatural in a building long stripped of power, its hum a low, insistent drone. My heart stuttered, the light impossible, a violation of the dark that made my skin crawl. I opened my mouth to ask if they saw it, but before I could speak, the entire right side of the building blazed with light, emergency lamps flaring on, their harsh glare revealing every crack, every stain, every shadow that seemed to writhe in the corners. We froze, panic surging, certain it was the cops, their patrol cars closing in. A dove behind a pile of tables to the left, his body low, his flashlight doused. B hobbled to a corner on the right, his knee buckling as he pressed against the wall. I stood rooted in front of the open elevator shaft, its darkness a void that seemed to pull at me, whispering promises of escape or oblivion. The lights weren't just wrong. They were alive, watching us, judging us for daring to trespass. Beams from outside swept through the windows, slow and deliberate, like searchlights hunting prey, their glare slicing through the dust-choked air. We crouched, hearts pounding, the silence shattered by sounds from within, shuffling steps echoing down the hall, doors groaning as they swung open, tables scraping across the floor with a force that wasn't human. The noises weren't random. They had purpose, closing in from every direction. A chorus of unrest that vibrated through the walls. The scent of decay grew stronger, mingled with something metallic, like blood left to rust. We stayed hidden for what felt like hours, though. It was probably 20 minutes. The beams circling the building, the sounds growing louder, more insistent, as if the hospital itself was waking, its anger stirred by our presence. I pressed myself against the wall, the cold tiles biting through my clothes, my eyes fixed on the hallway, my breath shallow to avoid drawing attention. As the outside lights made their final pass, I saw movement, a figure stepping out of a room, dressed in a white coat, its edges frayed and stained as if pulled from a forgotten grave. It turned toward me, its face obscured by shadow, but its eyes burned through the dark twin points of light that locked onto mine, searing my soul with a gaze that wasn't human. It raised its arms, a gesture slow and deliberate, not a plea but a command, its fingers long and twisted, reaching for something I couldn't see. My blood ran cold, my voice trapped in my throat, the world narrowing to those eyes. That figure, that moment. It turned and glided down the hall, its steps silent but heavy. the floor seeming to groan under a weight it shouldn't bear, its presence a violation of reality. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, rooted by a terror that felt ancient, as if the building had claimed me. I hissed at A and B, my voice barely a whisper, asking if they'd seen it. But they shook their heads, their faces pale, and drawn in the flashlight's dim glow, their eyes wide with a fear they couldn't name. The figure's gaze still burned in my mind, its weight a chain around my heart, its presence a stain I couldn't shake. Fear choked me, and we agreed to get out, convinced the cops had missed us but wouldn't leave. Better to face them than stay in this place where the walls seemed to breathe, their pulse a rhythm of rage and sorrow. We retraced our steps down the hallway, the charred files crunching under our feet, the air thick with dust and something fouler, like rotting flesh mingled with antiseptic, a smell that clung to my skin. The figure's room loomed as we passed, its door still open, a black void that dared me to look, its darkness pulsing with intent. I didn't, but I felt it watching, its eyes following us through the shadows, its will a pressure against my back. We reached the window we'd entered, the wooden panel now hanging loose, as if the building was eager to spit us out, or trap us deeper. I climbed out first, his movements quick despite the fear, then helped B, whose knee was swollen, his face tight with pain, his breath ragged. I was last, my hands shaking as I gripped the sill, the night air cold against my sweat damp, skin a relief that felt like betrayal. A cop grabbed us as we emerged, his grip firm but not cruel, pulling us through the window and lining us up against the building's damp, moss-slicked wall. His flashlight swept over us, its beam harsh in our eyes, his voice sharp but steady. "Anyone else in there?" I shook my head, my voice trembling, barely audible. "Just us. Why? Did you find someone?" I thought of the noises, the figure, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. The cop's eyes narrowed, his face hard in the beam's glow, his silence heavier than his words. "We never went inside," he said, his voice low, deliberate, each word a hammer. "Just drove around, shining our lights, kept seeing someone moving in there, so we stayed." The words hit like a punch, the world tilting under my feet, the hospital's silhouette looming behind us, its windows blacker. Then the night. The noises we'd heard, the steps, the scraping, the doors, weren't the cops. They were something else, something that had been with us the whole time, watching, moving, waiting in the dark. The hospital wasn't empty, and we'd walked right into its heart, stirring something that didn't want to sleep. The cop booked us for breaking and entering, the cuffs cold against my wrists, the ride to the station a blur of flashing lights and shame. We got community service, a minor punishment for a night that cost us more than we could measure. The memory of those eyes, that figure, clung to me, a shadow I couldn't outrun, a weight that settled in my bones. Years later, I was flipping through channels, restless on a sleepless night, and stopped on a paranormal show, the kind I'd grown to crave, drawn to the fear I'd tasted that night. The screen showed the hospital, its gothic facade unmistakable, its spires stark against a stormy sky. And my heart stopped. A ghost hunter in the basement caught an apparition on camera, a figure in a white coat, its movements jerky, its eyes burning through the grainy footage, identical to what I'd seen, its gaze a knife through time. It was him, the doctor, still there, still watching, his presence a wound that never closed. The show called him a residual haunting, a doctor tied to the hospital's dark past, perhaps a witness to its crimes, or a perpetrator of them. But to me he was more, a presence that knew we were there, that chose to show itself, its arms raised not in surrender but in claim. I drive by the hospital sometimes, its silhouette a magnet against the horizon, pulling at me with a force I can't explain. It terrifies me, its windows still watching, but part of me wants to go back, to face it, to know what we woke that night. Some places don't let you go, and this one's still waiting. Its doors open, its shadows alive with eyes that never blink.